Today on the Rise of the Challenge podcast.
I'm not going to take this next contract. I'm going to go over to the USA and I'm going to try to make the Chicago Bulls roster, and you don't make it. You can't go back to the team in Spain and say, okay, well, that didn't work out. Let me come back. Because by the time you come back, they already replaced you with someone else. Yeah. So you have to kind of weigh this. You have to weigh it. Do I want to take the chance of making the NBA and sit at the end of the bench? Or should I just stay overseas in Europe and be the best player on the team and be the highest paid player on the team, and I have this great lifestyle and I can bring my wife and my kids over there with me?
Welcome to the Rise of the Challenge podcast. Joined today, he's a former basketball player, entrepreneur, author, speaker, and content creator. It's Dre Baldwin. How you doing today, Dre?
I'm doing excellent, Alex. Thank you for having me on. How are you?
Doing good. We're so excited to have you on the show to talk about your Rise to the Challenge. What we like to do with all of our guests is go right to the beginning. Talk about where you're from and what you like doing growing up.
From the city of Philadelphia, what I liked doing growing up was, of course, well, not of course, but I was always into sports. So I was always athletic. So always into playing any kind of sport. So growing up as a kid, we're talking like before 10 years old, this is backyard or driveway football, because we didn't have yards, we were in a concrete. So football, two-hand touch football. Somebody had one of those garage basketball courts, so you could pull out the garage and raise the rim, lower the rim. We played that, kickball, that kind of stuff. Eventually, as I got older, we went to the playgrounds, and then we started playing with all the kids in the neighborhood. So sports was one thing, and then computers was the other thing. So computers came along a little bit later. It was based on my age bracket. I was born in 1982. So computers was probably around age 13-ish. So my family got our first home computer and I got on it. I knew that was something that I had a future in somewhere, somehow in computers, not on the back end, like coding, but on the front end, which didn't really become a thing until maybe 10 years later, where you could actually do stuff on the front end, which we now have, social media and websites, et cetera. So I would say those two main things were, and also video games. So I guess video games is a form of computers. So I eventually morphed into computers. I don't play video games anymore. After college, I stopped playing, but it was sports and then the computers. And I guess video games was kind of the early version of computers for me.
With sports, at a young age playing them, what did it learn about yourself playing sports? I think a lot of times kids are told, have fun. And then sometimes at a certain age, they kind of change the mindset of the kids where it's all about winning. But personally for you, did it teach you anything about yourself growing up playing sports?
And that's a tough question, Alex. I never thought about it that way as a kid. I wasn't thinking if I was learning anything about myself. I don't think I even had that purview to even ask that question. So for me, it was, I knew I was competitive. I knew I liked to win, and I understood the essence of sports was about, yes, you are playing. It is a game, but the reason that we keep score is because we want to know who is winning and who's not winning. So I always understood that. I always had the mindset of, okay, we're going to play, then let's put ourselves or myself in a position to win the game. So I could see the competitive streak inside of me that I wanted to compete in the short term, which is win the game today, but also the long term, which is how can I continually get better so that in the long run, maybe I might not be the best player this year, but let's say next year or 2 years from now, I'll be better than all these other competitors.
We talked in my intro, but former basketball player. When did basketball become your main sport that you were playing? Or were you, as you're getting older, you're still playing all these sports, but somehow basketball became that main priority?
Age 14. So I had played a little bit of a few other sports, mostly I played a lot of two-hand touch football on the street. And then the first football team I actually was going to play for, I never got around to really playing. I never even got to the point of having the equipment. My family just couldn't afford football equipment. So they suggested, why don't you play a different sport that didn't cost so much money? So I went to play baseball for a while. Wasn't really that good at baseball. I played, but I was kind of mediocre. I didn't really have the necessary tools to be good at baseball. And then by then I was age 14 and I knew about basketball, but I had never really dedicated myself to it. I wouldn't even call it dedication because we're talking 14 years old. So it was like, it was never that basketball was the main thing for me until age 14. That's when I started focusing more on basketball. And the good thing about basketball is that you don't need any equipment to play. You can just practice and play pretty much by yourself as long as you have a ball on the court. And that's where I ended up settling in. So that was age 14. And there were other sports I never really tried or was never introduced to. So I never got introduced to hockey, for example. Never got introduced to, well, in my neighborhood, there's a tennis court, but nobody played. Like there was one kid in my neighborhood I remember who played tennis. I think I would have been pretty good at tennis because the same physical tools you need for basketball, speed, agility, athleticism, and conditioning, the same things you need for basketball. So I think I would have been pretty good, but nobody really got me into tennis. I remember I went to one tennis camp for like 2 weeks, but other than that, that was it. So basketball was age 14.
I would be that kid on the tennis court because I tennis was such a game for me that I played at a young age. You
Yeah.
talked about that moment where your parents said, pick a different sport because
Mhm.
of the cost of it. Do you look back and it's kind of that fun what if question?
Mhm.
If your family had the financials to afford to play football, how far do you think you would have gone with football? Do you feel like it's hard to tell because it changed at times? You might have been the same way. I transitioned to basketball at some point. Would you have
Mhm.
wanted to go far with football if you were able to?
I think I probably would have ended up at basketball anyway. I think my body is not really made to get hit that much, the way football is designed, or to hit other people and get hit that much. I don't think my body was made for that. I think basketball was the perfect sport for me. Basketball or tennis were the
Mhm.
perfect sports for me. So basketball is still contact, but it's not nearly as much contact
Yeah.
as football. So I think I would have ended up in the same place.
As you're growing up, who are the big inspirations in your life? Was there a certain person or a group of people that were big motivators for you?
It was mostly the athletes because I was really into sports. So my first favorite athlete was Deion Sanders, and everybody who's from the environment that I'm from, we all like Deion because he played two sports and he was flashy and he had a style to him and he was actually good. So it's not like he was just flashy with no substance. He was actually very good. So because I was playing football and then a little bit of baseball, I was thinking maybe I could be like Deion. But as you can see, that didn't turn out that way. Still liked him even though I was playing basketball. And then once I got into basketball, of course, Michael Jordan was the guy at this time. We're talking to early and mid 90s. So Michael Jordan. I liked Reggie Miller was another player that I liked in basketball. And then anybody who was somebody in that mid to late 90s era. So you had Penny Hardaway, you had Allen Iverson, Kobe Bryant was starting to emerge, those guys. So it was mostly the athletes just because I was playing sports. And my parents were both in my life, but they were not athletes. So it's not like I was looking to them for my athletic inspiration because by about age 15, 16, I was thinking maybe I can make it as an athlete. I didn't have any tangible proof that I was going to make it as an athlete, but that was my idea. And so I was looking to the athletes and seeing what I could draw from them.
As you kind of answered that fun question we're asking, what's that dream job? You kind of just mentioned that goal of being an athlete. If it wasn't an athlete, did you have a kind of idea of what other kind of career you wanted to go into?
That's a great question. I did not. I didn't have any other idea. I think, well, actually, when I went to college, my first major was computer science because I liked computers so much. So I was thinking, well, maybe I can do something with computers. I didn't realize that computer science was really about like the back end. That was like the coders and the people who sit in dark rooms writing stuff. That's not me. I'm the person who needs to be like this in front of the camera, not behind the camera. So computer science was not the right major for me. I eventually changed it to business, which is where I should have been. So I was not, I probably would have maybe done something in the computer space. I don't know what it would have been at that time because I graduated college in 2004. So I don't know what kind of career I would have ended up in, given my skill set. But I probably, had it not been sports, Alex, I probably would have gone into some form of sales or marketing because that is another just natural ability that I had that I realized that I had that probably once I got into the college space and I realized that the communication skill is the biggest thing when you're in marketing and sales. And I had a natural ability to communicate, was never nervous in front of audiences, public speaking, so to speak. And that means like two or more people, was never nervous with that. And I realized that a lot of people didn't really have that ability. So had it not been sports, it probably would have been something that would have utilized my communication skill, maybe teaching, because my mom's a teacher. So maybe I would have maybe leaned into the teaching space, education space. I don't know if I would have stuck around in it. I probably would not have survived because I don't work too good in bureaucracies. And I'm trying to think what else. Maybe music, entertainment, something like that. Because my dad's a musician, so he's into music. So I maybe would have leaned into that, but not as a creator of music. I'm not a rapper or a singer, but maybe like a manager or an executive or something like that. But other than that, I never really thought that deeply about it because by about 15, 16, I decided I was going to go for sports and I just pretty much stayed on that route.
With marketing and sales, kind of what you're doing today kind of really
Right.
shows full circle about the skill set that a salesperson has or a person in
Mhm.
marketing, with you talking about being that person that likes to be on front of the camera than in the back end, especially with the computer science part that you just talked about. And I think it
Mhm.
just shows that sometimes your path may not go in the direction you want, but those skill sets still come with you no matter which direction you go to. And it just shows that you have that skill set even in those paths that you wanted to go into.
That's right, because as with basketball, and I'm sure we'll get to this, because I went to a small school, for me to even get a chance to play as a at the professional level, I had to market and sell myself. That's
Yep.
really the key thing that helped me get on. So that marketing and sales skill did end up popping up at some point. And my mind was always open to it. I responded to a bulletin board ad in college. I remember that was this guy was basically, he was not basically, but he was doing network marketing, which I was not familiar with at the time. But network marketing is sales. I mean, they don't call it that when they're trying to pitch you, but that's pretty much what it is, sales. And that was a great experience for me because it not only let me see what it's like to actually be out there selling your stuff and doing it face to face, nose to nose, as they say, sitting in people's living rooms trying to sell them something, but also the experience of learning how entrepreneurship works and learning the fundamental pieces of entrepreneurship, which was very important for me because, and I always credit to this day, the fact that I'm an entrepreneur now is because of my experience in network marketing, which is a very brief experience. And it's not like I was super successful. I was like this 20-year-old kid who I had no influence with my circle, but the experience of doing it showed me, okay, there's another way to generate revenue in life besides going and working somewhere. Even as an athlete, being an athlete is a job. A lot of people don't
Yeah.
realize that. But I always had my eye on entrepreneurship because I knew being an athlete as a career does not last forever.
You mentioned going to a small school, and a lot of
Mhm.
times with athletes, those small schools don't get the awareness of a lot of the big professional leagues. How was that a challenge for you, and how were you able to rise above it to get that opportunity to go professional in basketball?
Well, that was the whole thing. It's not that we didn't get any attention from any professional league, big or small. So there was no professional attention whatsoever paid to my school. And when I graduated from college 2004, me and one of my teammates, we both had professional careers. His wasn't as long as mine, but he played. Nobody's gone pro since, and it's been 20 years, literally 20 years. Nobody's gone pro since from our school. So we don't get that attention. And that wasn't even something, it's not even on anybody's radar if you're going to the school that I went to. So I realized this, and this is just an insight. And this is something that to this day, Alex, and I'm sure we'll get to this as well. Insight is my most important skill, my most valuable tool now as an entrepreneur. I realized looking at some of my people who had graduated maybe before me at my school and people who played at the same time as me or right after me, and they had better resumes than me in college, but they didn't even get a sniff or a call to try to play pro ball, despite the fact they had put up these great statistics that, again, were better than mine. So I realized, okay, no matter what you do at this school, it doesn't matter as far as the pros go. So I realized that what I had done in college or what I had not done in college was completely immaterial to whether I could play pro or not. So I had a fresh slate. As soon as I got out of school, everything I did in college no longer mattered because the pro scouts didn't care anyway. So I knew that I was starting at zero and I was going to have to build myself up as if these people didn't know me because they literally did not know me. So for me, it was just figuring out, all right, where can I go? What do I need to do so that someone who actually has some repute in the pro basketball world can see me and put in a good word about me? I understood that I needed to do that. And then from there, how do I go connect with someone who actually knows some people who can actually help me get a job? Because I knew I was going to be playing outside of the USA. It's not like the Knicks or the Lakers were calling. So I was going to go play somewhere in Europe. So I need to connect with an agent because they know people over there, and I had never been outside of the country at that point. So I just kind of mentally deconstructed, what does this process look like? What do I need to do to make it happen? And then I just went about trying to make it happen. There was no guarantee it would, but that was the plan.
What was that experience like getting the opportunity to play at an international location for basketball?
Amazing. It was the best job I've ever had in my life. And I'm an entrepreneur now. I've been a full-time entrepreneur for almost a decade. And it was a way better job being a basketball player. Entrepreneurship is a lot more work. So that being a professional athlete is the best job you could possibly have. You are literally playing a game for a living. Just that alone is it. You're playing a game for a living, and you're getting paid for it. And if you're playing internationally, even if you're playing in the USA, I mean, you're traveling around the world or around the country on somebody else's dime, and all you had to do is play a game. That's all you had to do. And a long day at work is about 3 hours. There's no job in the world that matches that. There's no job that comes close to that. So that your answer to your question is the best job you could possibly have. So any athlete out there, if you get the chance, even if you only play 1 year, take it because you're not going to have another experience like that.
What teams and countries did you play in or play for?
So I was in 8 different countries over the course of 9 years. So I started in Lithuania. Then I played for a traveling team in the United States, actually. It was like a showcase type of basketball team. So not anything you would see on TV. From there, I was in Mexico. Then I was in Germany. Then I was in Montenegro. Then Germany, Montenegro, or Montenegro, Germany, one or the other. Then I was in Slovakia. I was in Croatia. I was in briefly in England, then back to Mexico again. And I think I covered everything. I might have missed one.
With all those locations, did you kind of get to enjoy the culture while being in those teams or on those teams in those countries? Because a lot of times that's an experience that a lot of athletes don't get to experience is going
Mm,
out of the country, playing in different countries, learning about the different cultures where they get into a town for all these US teams, they get into a town, they have to go play, and then they're
mhm.
right back on a plane leaving.
Right. So sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. It really depends on what you want to do because, again, as I said, as an athlete, Alex, a long day at work is only a couple hours.
Mhm.
So even a 4 hour day is the longest you could possibly have. So you have plenty of time on your hands. And it's just a matter of what the person wants to do. So for me, in some countries, I did get to experience it. I would say in a country like Germany, because I had friends who actually lived in Germany while I was in Germany. So they could show me around and show me stuff and they could speak the language and they could, hey, bring me to places that I never would have found on my own because I didn't speak German. And also in Germany, you have a lot of Americans there just because of the military presence. So there's a lot of Americans just walking around Germany. So it's not like a big deal to see somebody like me.
Mhm.
Whereas in other places, let's say like Lithuania, the first place I played, if you don't speak the language, it's going to be very hard to get around because a lot of the older people at that time, I'm 23 years of age, people who are like 35 and up, they did not speak English. Even my coach didn't speak English, believe it or not. So only the young people who are like my age and younger, they grew up kind of looking at our TV and stuff. They could speak English, but if you didn't really have like a close friend who spoke English, they couldn't really show you the culture. So in these places where you needed to know the language, you needed to know a person. If you didn't know a person, then that wouldn't happen. So in some places I played, I kind of mixed and mingled in the streets more than in other places. It just depended on the situation, on whether I did that more or not. But every place I played, now that I'm talking about it, I think I ended up meeting someone or knew someone who was from the country who could also speak English and they could kind of take me under their wing, so to speak, and show me, hey, let me show you this restaurant, or let's go to the mall, or let me introduce you to my friends, or I'll bring you to this party. Places that I couldn't have gone on my own because, again, I had the language barrier. So to answer your question, I think every place that I played, yes, I did get to experience some of the culture. I probably would do more if I was going there now because I just am more aware. But
Yep.
back then, when you're in the midst of it, Alex, and this is a sprint, as a professional athlete, your career is a sprint. A lot of times you're thinking about how do I make sure that I play well in the next game because you're trying to keep your career going and make sure that you live up to the expectation that's set before you.
You talked about the career lasted 9 years. When did you start feeling it was kind of nearing the end, or were you hoping that after near the end, it would hopefully transition to the NBA, more another professional league in that case?
Well, the way it works is any basketball player wants to play in the NBA. So if you're playing professional basketball, any American who's playing professional basketball overseas right now, if an NBA team called and wanted them to just come play for us, they would go. Most of them. Now, there are some when you get to a certain age, you might just say, all right, my family's over here. I got a life over here. I have a good deal with the team I'm on. Maybe I don't want to play in the NBA anymore. But most players, let's say if you're 25 and under, they would take the NBA opportunity if it came. So every year that I was playing, I would love to have gotten a shot at the NBA, but as they say, it's a kind of a numbers game. It's also a talent thing. So the NBA team has to look at you and say, all right, this guy might be on our radar. Do you have the size? Do you have the skill set? Are you a player who can fill a role that we need on this team? Because what many people don't understand, fans from the outside looking in, is that a lot of times there may be 10 guaranteed contracts already on a team. So let's say what city are you in, Alex?
St. Louis.
St. Louis. Okay, so the closest team to you is what? Memphis?
It's probably Chicago Bulls, I think.
All right, Chicago,
Yeah.
right. Okay, so let's say the Chicago Bulls. So they may only be allowed to have 15 guaranteed contracts. So they might already have 13. So they only need two people.
Mhm.
And the two spots that they want to fill might be for people who play a different position than me. So even if I'm a really good player and they think I'm good, well, you're playing the same position as, let's say I was saying, playing the same position as LeBron James. Well, you're probably not going to get on that team because they don't need anybody. All right, they already got that spot filled. So sometimes it's timing, sometimes it's opportunity, sometimes does the team even see you as someone who could help them, or they need. And if you are playing overseas, let's say you have a good relationship with the team you're playing for in Spain, and they want to sign you to another contract, but you say, I'm not going to take this next contract. I'm going to go over to the USA and I'm going to try to make the Chicago Bulls roster, and you don't make it. You can't go back to the team in Spain and say, okay, well, that didn't work out. Let me come back. Because by the time you come back, they already replaced you with someone else.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of weigh this. You have to weigh it. Do I want to take the chance of making the NBA and sit at the end of the bench? Or should I just stay overseas in Europe and be the best player on the team and be the highest paid player on the team? And I have this great lifestyle and I can bring my wife and my kids over there with me. So it's a lot of things that people have to weigh, that a lot of fans don't really understand this. And as you get older, you're thinking more about the lifestyle and your long-term play rather than just the basketball play. So for me, the answer to your question is yes. Every year I want to try to get a chance at the NBA, but the closest I got was having some conversations with some scouts, but I never got to the point of them saying, okay, we're going to bring you to the gym and we're going to bring a bunch of other guys into, and we're going to see what you can do. I never got to that point.
As basketball wasn't the final chapter in your journey, it just started the next chapter in your
Right.
life. You are an author and you've written a lot. What was passionate about writing all these books? And what is the main mission with each book that you're hoping that a listener, not a listener, a reader learns from it?
Well, I have to give credit to my mother for that. She's an educator. So she had my sister and my sister's a year older than me. She had us reading from a very young age. And reading, I stuck with that habit throughout my life. Still read a lot to this day. And reading led to the writing. So the first thing I was doing online to actually put myself out there was actually I had a blog. And then I started a YouTube channel. More people found me through YouTube than through the blog. But I've always been a writer. So where it came from was that, and also just being able to express myself through the written word, because I knew that not a lot of people had that ability. So I had less competition through writing than in any other space that I was going to put my material out there, because not a lot of people can put their thoughts together in words in a way that is kind of entertaining and allows people to kind of follow through whatever story you're telling. So when it came to the writing, I've written a bunch of books to this day. I'm not going to answer for each book, but each one has a purpose. Most of them are self-help and personal and professional development. Only one of my books, my very first one, is a narrative where I'm just telling a story. All the rest of them are some form of personal development, professional development, whether it's around mindset, some type of business strategy, a communication skill, a tactical thing. Like I have books on how to play basketball overseas if you want to and you don't know what to do. So it's always just giving people something that if you read it and apply it, it will help you get better.
With the books that really help people grow in personal development and personal
Mhm.
growth, when you're sharing your experiences or your stories, do you feel that connection with those readers that they're able to relate in some capacity? They might have had the same thought or the same kind of idea, or they're working towards something that you're talking about that can help them reach their goals.
Well, I find that out when they tell me what they got from the books. So I don't know it when I'm writing it because I don't know who's going to read it. But when I get the feedback from people, they tell me, Dre, I love what you have in this book because this has really helped me, or it helped reinforce something, or it reminded me of something, or it gave me a new insight and a new way of looking at things, or it helped me shift the paradigm that I had in my mind around this concept. And this is the reason why I said earlier, Alex, that my number one skill is insight. And what I mean by that is a lot of things you can say about that. And one of my superpowers. It's my ability to take a concept that may seem complex to a person, but I can break it down and simplify it, make it easy to understand and absorb, and also to apply. And that's what I do in a lot of my books. So I can take an example of something that happened to me on the basketball court and explain it, break it down, and give the takeaways to someone who has never played a minute of sports. And they will get it and they'll be able to use it. So that's what my books do.
With writing, you're able to really kind of take the concepts and transition to speaking and content creation. What's been
Mm.
passionate about doing those also? All three kind of at the same time, but also including the entrepreneurship kind of route at the same time.
Yeah, so the speaking is kind of an extension of writing because you'll notice a lot of professional speakers write books, right? It's almost if you see one, you see the other oftentimes. And when it comes to the content was a different lane because that was more of a newer thing. Writing has always been around. Writing wasn't new. I mean, we had newspapers and journalists for decades, but the content where you can just create something from your basement and you can put it on the internet and people can now know you, that didn't start until right around that time that I graduated from school. And that's when YouTube came out. And right now, YouTube's probably the biggest platform when it comes to just user generated content, where you can just put something out and get yourself known without knowing anybody or going through a gatekeeper. So for me, that started with the basketball material, and a lot of ball players came to know me because, again, I always had the ability to explain things. So once I started explaining the game, I kind of became a virtual coach to legions of players, probably hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of basketball players over the years because of my ability to explain what I was doing. It wasn't just because I was good at it, because there's a lot of good basketball players, but my ability to explain is really what set me apart from whoever else was out there in the space back then. And I haven't put out a basketball video in a decade, but now you got a whole other wave of basketball players doing the same thing these days who are putting out their stuff because that it started back when YouTube first came out. So just that ability to break things down and explain it, that applies in the speaking, it applies in the writing, and it applies in the content.
Do you have a speaking opportunity that has been memorable for you? That's something that's been a one, kind of like a bucket list goal that you hit at this time, but you probably have a lot more goals when it comes to speaking.
I don't know if I never thought about it that way with that frame of being one that like, man, I'm so glad I got this one. I probably, if there's one that you mean like one I did already or one that I want to do?
One that you did, and then you can kind of
Okay.
also, what is that goal speaking opportunity? Sometimes people like to go on the TEDx stage, or there's like
Yeah.
a certain expo that they want to go to.
Hmm. So I don't know if I have anyone that would be a specific event that I would want to speak at in the future. I'll answer the second question first. I've done 4 TEDx talks. I want to do the main TED stage. So there's TEDx and then there's TED. And for TED, you got to kind of get chosen. They got to call you. Whereas TEDx, you can apply and you apply to enough of them. Eventually, maybe somebody says yes. So I've applied to a lot of TED talks, and that's how I ended up getting them TEDx talks, that is. But the TED main conference, I would love to speak at that. Somehow they would have to find me. As far as any other events to speak at, whoever can pay, or whoever's going to pay my fee. All right, those are the ones that I'll take, and then we'll take whatever comes from that. Now, as far as what I've already done, there is one that ended up being great. I didn't know it was going to be great before it happened because it was about what happened as a result of it. So I was speaking at this event called the Association for Talent Development, also known as ATD. They're a very big conference, big personal professional development conference. They have it every year, different places. And I spoke at this one in Atlanta, and they were not going to pay me to speak. They didn't, no fee, nothing, zero. They didn't pay travel and they did not pay for the hotel. So this event cost me like $2,000, let alone the opportunity cost of not being at home and actually working because the flight, hotel, food, and the time. So I go speak there, and before I got on the stage, I was thinking, why am I even doing this event? Because it was in Atlanta, it was raining. I'm like, man, why am I even doing this? I should have stayed home, not even done this event. But when I got into the room, I got there like before the speaker before me was speaking. So, because I was doing a breakout session. So there's 4 or 5 sessions going on at the same time. And the wave before me, this guy's speaking. I walk in the room and I see all the people sitting. I'm like, okay, if I got this many people standing there to listen to me, then I knew I was going to come alive and perform because I am a performer. So I went to do my speech, and before I even got on the stage, a woman approached me and she handed me her card and she said, Dre, I can't be here to hear your session, but I know who you are because your name's in the program, so they know who you are. And she handed me her card and said, give me a call because we have some opportunities for you. She worked for the NBA, National Basketball Association, and she wanted to hire me to speak to the teams in the NBA because they have these programs. These are behind the scenes programs that most fans don't know about, that leagues hire speakers to come and talk to the players about certain life things. So, for example, and I spoke to the NBA's minor league called the G League. They called it, they might have been a D League still then, but now it's the G League. And I spoke to every team in the league. And it would be me and maybe two other people, and then a couple people from the league. And there was one woman who would talk about kind of like life, domestic violence and relationships. She would talk about that. And then there are people who would talk about finance and how do you manage your money and make sure that you have money when your career's over. And then me, I was talking about what are you going to do after sports? Because I had transitioned from being a ball player to being an entrepreneur. So I was kind of giving them examples of things they could do to get ready. So in that's the reason I brought her up, is because she gave me her card and told me to call her, and she didn't even hear my speech. She just knew who I was, and she saw me in the program. So that was a great opportunity just from being there, for being in the room. And then when I got off the stage, I had given a speech called Work on Your Game, Apply the Pro Athlete Mindset to Business. A woman approached me and said, Dre, I know you have a bunch of books that you have self-published. Because at this point, I had a bunch of books written at this point. And she said, have you ever thought about writing a book with a traditional publisher? And I said, as a matter of fact, the speech that I just gave, I need to write a book called Work on Your Game. And I had always been thinking about that. I was just holding it until I could take the time to do it the right way, because I wanted to make it comprehensive of everything that I talk about. And she said, well, I'm with a traditional publisher. She gave me a card, said, give me a call. And she was with a traditional Manhattan publisher in Manhattan, McGraw-Hill. And the book Work on Your Game, which exists to this day, as a matter of fact, is right there over my shoulder. That book came from her giving me her card right there on the speech, right there on the stage when I got off, right there in the room when I got off the stage from that speech. So that event, and also someone from the NCAA, she approached me and said, we want you to come speak to our audiences. So sometimes just being in the right place at the right time and people seeing you and shaking your hand, that leads to all the opportunity. So that event was probably, of all the ones that I've done, even though you didn't pay me, other events that paid me more money, that event, I think opportunity wise, was actually the best one, even though I didn't even get paid for it.
I mean, that's just an awesome story because you kind of mentioned right before, it's like you didn't feel like wanting to be there because of
Right.
all the negative stuff that was the cost, the being away from family, being away from working. But it ended
Right.
up giving you multiple more opportunities that really kind of excelled your career and what you were doing. So it's kind
Mhm.
of like what you mentioned, being there, being in the moment. You never know what can happen. Some opportunities may not feel right, but you don't know what can happen after. And you kind of brought it up great. That basically that kind of theme was perfect with that story you shared.
Thank you.
We've talked about your professional journey that you've been on, but how have you been able to handle both the professional side, but your personal side? Have you been able to kind of enjoy the personal side of the path that you've been on while still making the professional side work?
Absolutely. The good thing about being an entrepreneur is that you get to make your own schedule. So, I mean, you can set your business up to where you're working all the time or working as little time as possible. So it's really up to you how you want to set things up. But personally, yes, excuse me, I've been able to enjoy the personal side of it because I make sure I get up early and get my, I guess what we call self-care in. So I still work out every single day, still go to the gym, still go outside and run and make sure my body's taken care of. And then I can spend the rest of the day doing more business and work stuff, and then try to end my work day enough time to spend some time with I have one child, so spend time with my son. And so, yes, I've been able to find that balance, which doesn't necessarily have to be 50-50, but just making sure you're giving enough to every side that you want to give it to.
When your son gets older, what is the biggest thing you want him to learn about the experience that you have gone through?
Well, I'll make him read all my books, so he knows about that. But he's going to understand. I'll introduce him to sports, and maybe he'll play. But that the most important thing is that he understands. He needs to understand personal finance, which I didn't understand as a child. He needs to understand entrepreneurship, so that he understands how to go and create opportunities for himself. He wants to be able to do it. So those are the two, and he's going to understand personal development. So those are the three things: so finance, personal development, entrepreneurship. Sports, if he happens to play, that's fine, but he doesn't have to.
What do you see in the future for yourself? What do you feel in the next few years you're hoping to accomplish, the path that you want to take? Any new paths, new chapters, or do you really want to just keep excelling at what you're doing and creating content, maybe writing more books, continue to being on the stage?
Well, actually, both. So everything that you all the above, I want to do. So the work on your game philosophy, I want to get that word out there to more people. So I would guess, Alex, that most of the people listening to the show never heard of me or work on your game before this conversation. So it's getting work on your game to become more ubiquitous in the space of personal and professional development is a big thing that I want to do. And in order to do that, then I'm going to do all the other stuff. I'm going to have to write more books and do more content and be on more platforms like this one where there's audiences of people who have not heard of me before. So as far as those things you mentioned, we already got plenty in the works. So this year, I probably have 7 books that we're going to put out this year. We just haven't put the funnels out yet. A lot of the material is already written. So it's just a matter of getting the material out and getting the sales funnels out and all of that stuff. It was going to require extra sets of hands. I only got 2 hands. So we need more people in place. We need more systems in place. And I know how to put systems in place. I know how to hire the right people. So all of these things, just getting these things activated and moving with respect to the fact that our time is limited. So getting this stuff in place as quickly as possible and then making sure we have a process for everything so that I don't have to do it all myself and it's not all just coming out of my head, because that's a failure point. If anything happens to me or I'm not around, then all the rest of it falls apart. So just got to make sure everything is systematized.
People that are listening to the audio interview won't see this, but on your right bicep, you have that phrase, work on your game. And similar
Yes.
to how I have the sign that says rise to the challenge, and you have the
Yeah.
books that say that phrase, having that on your body, you see that phrase all the time. Does that
Mm.
help motivate you to kind of always think about that phrase is a big passion for you? That kind of is like a branding in a way. What does that
Mm.
mean to you?
Well, the work on your game philosophy all started way back when I was playing basketball, and I don't think about it that way consciously, the way that you just described, because when you got it on your arm all every day, you tend to stop noticing it. So as you just pointed it out, I mean, I know my whole thing is called work on your game. So I notice if I'm walking around like this, people will see it, and I see them notice it, or I have the hat on, or something like that, or somebody sees the book behind me if I'm on a video camera. So for me, no, it's not really that it motivates me. I think I'm more internally motivated. And for what we do and the things that I help people with, we really talk about discipline over motivation, because sometimes I'm not motivated. Sometimes I don't maybe feel like it, so to speak. But the discipline is the most important thing for a professional, because if you're not motivated, that doesn't give you an excuse to not do your job.
The final question I'll ask you for someone that's listening to this interview based on your journey and experience, what tips or advice would you give them to overcome obstacles, accomplish their goals, and rise to the challenge?
Most importantly is figure out what's the ultimate outcome that you want. Because if you're ambitious and you have big goals, it's guaranteed that you're going to face challenges. It's guaranteed that there are going to be times when things are not working the way that you want them to work. Things may be going the exact opposite direction from how you want them to go. And that's a challenge from the goal that you have, or from the universe, or from God, or however you want to call it. It's a challenge to find out if you're serious about reaching this goal. And the bigger your goal, the bigger the challenge you're going to face. And the question is not whether or not you're going to face the challenge. The question is, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to deal with that challenge that you face? And the people who are able to be resilient and persevere and persist through the challenges, those are the ones who get to tell their stories in the end, because everybody has a story. It's just that nobody wants to sign up to hear a story of a person who didn't succeed. We only want to hear the stories of the winners. So you got to be a winner in order to tell your story. And everybody wants to tell their stories, just not everybody gets to tell theirs.
Dre, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about your rise to the challenge. You're inspiring so many people, and we are excited to see what the future looks like for you.
Well, much appreciated, Alex. I appreciate you sharing your platform. Thank you for the opportunity.
Tune in next time to hear my next guest talk about their rise to the challenge. Remember to follow, subscribe on all major audio platforms. And make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to get full-length episode in video format. What path do you take to accomplish your goals? You decide.